When we see individuals struggle in learning, what do we do as instructors? We want to try to come in and save them. The hardest part is watching that new instructor try to dab in to get them out of that hard spot and actually move them away and say, no. What question would you ask them to get them to the next step?
That was Tony Anderman, the Director of Training for Spokane County Sheriff's Office. And today, we're going to dive into that topic and really explore that conversation. See, most law enforcement training is built around this concept where we have to deliver answers and provide information. But what happens when instructors stop standing at the front of the room for lecture time and start facilitating through the ambiguity? Now, welcome to the ILEETA Learning Lab Podcast, where we explore ideas, innovations, and real-world practices that help law enforcement trainers grow, adapt, and inspire excellence. I'm your host, Joe Willis, the Deputy Executive Director for ILEETA. And today's guest is Tony Anderman. Like I said, he's the Director of Training for Spokane County Sheriff's Office and one of the lead curriculum developers behind the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agencies, or DARPA, Strategic Social Interactions Modules Program, commonly known as SSIM. Tony spent more than 25 years working on instructional systems design, leadership development, facilitation, and human dynamics training across military and law enforcement environments, both nationally and internationally. In this episode, we're going to dive into a topic that hits very close to home for many of us: problems-based learning, facilitation, and why ambiguity in the classroom can feel so uncomfortable at times, not just for the students, but for us as instructors as well. We're going to talk about why many instructors instinctively revert back to the old-fashioned lecture mode, how tactical social interaction, or TSI, as Tony describes it, was developed by the Marine Corps for social interactions in the field. We're going to talk about the role emotional intelligence plays in communication and operational performance. And we're going to talk about how agencies can begin experimenting with more facilitation-based learning environments without completely abandoning what it is you're already doing. About 25 minutes into the conversation, we're going to talk about the power of the pause. And you're really going to want to stick around to kind of hear how we both pull the thread on that just a little bit. And then at about 38 minutes or so into the episode, we're going to talk about the possibility and the reality, actually, of losing control in a classroom where you use this technique. It's going to happen to you. And what do you do to get it back? How do you best design the learning to make sure it only happens as low risk as possible? But yes, there will be some challenges and some struggle. We address that. And then towards the end of the episode, don't miss Tony's perspective on why communication should be viewed more as an operational necessity and not just simply glanced over as some soft skill to be taught because we have to teach it. This is a deep conversation. It's exploratory, it's messy in all the right ways. And if you're a dedicated trainer, facilitator, supervisor, leader of any kind, trying to move beyond that check the box training, and you think problem-based learning might be a way of getting after it, this is the episode for you. Here's my conversation with Tony. What is problem-based learning, and why do instructors struggle with it so much?
Joe, that's a really good question. And I'll just make it simple. It's student-centered, right? It's student-driven. That's problem-based learning. Around those ill-structured, innovative type of scenarios, questions, Socratic questions, how do we pull that information out of the student versus allowing somebody to stand on a platform to give them information? And I think with your background, you know that if we're not doing our best in order to help that student retain that information longer, and use it faster, if you will, we're not doing our job as, in a directorship or as instructors. So problem-based learning is one of those areas that it's tricky. It's difficult to facilitate if you are not willing to let go of your ego and give it back over to the students to allow them to enjoy the environment of learning. Even going through the worst of struggles, they usually leave that environment going, okay, I get it. I've learned a great deal. My brain's tired.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of you scratch an itch here with this. We're so used to being raised in an environment where if you don't have all the answers, asking yourself, do you even really belong in front of the room? And so as we kind of, pull the thread on this a little bit, let's dive into that ambiguity that exists in that space and kind of have a little bit of fun talking about not just what it is, but how to deal with it. And so as we look at the problem-based learning and the problems with facilitation and some of those discomfort and uncomfortable spaces to be in, first of all, what drove you to get after this problem? I mean, the problem-based learning, but what drove you to write this article?
I think a lot of it had to do with myself and my peers, Dr. Steve Ledick and Dr. Ruth Shockey. We were working with DARPA at the time, and this came to the end of the project. And we realized through the whole time of delivering this product for DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, that a lot of people struggled not only with the environment of problem-based learning, right, being the student of that environment, but also facilitating problem-based learning. So we thought we'd just kind of share some recipes, if you will, on how we developed the content, how we developed the, the class tactical social interaction course through that process. Because I'll back up. It was a 3-week course, Joe, right? And the military, the Marine Corps said, hey, that's going to cost us a lot of money. So can you bring that down a bit? So we researched a lot of it. In fact, I got trained out of Canada in problem-based learning. We said, let's just get rid of the lecture. We know that if we put it within a 40-hour block, it'll feel like they got 3 weeks of training. And hear what I said, feel. But we realized they were getting 3 weeks of training in a 40-hour block because the amount of research and the amount of work the students themselves received. So that's one of the main drivers, is to push this forward, is to get instructors to realize that there's more than just lecture. There's more than just group learning, if you will, and then come back to it and lecture it again. This is an all-out problem-oriented based course where there's little to no lecture. In fact, more recently, there's no lecture. There's key points where we make sure they hit. There's conversations, but no lecture, no PowerPoints whatsoever.
Tell us a little bit about TSI, what that was, how it came to be.
Back in, I think it was 2012 to 2014, I was pulled into a DARPA project I worked for the state of Washington at the time for the academy, and some great people came in and said, hey, why don't you come in and do this for us? We need a good writer for the classroom portion. Mind you, there were multiple teams on this DARPA project. It was a $47 million project for the military to do just what they were asking. That is, how do we go about teaching our Marine Corps studs, if you will, men and women, how do we teach them how to communicate within garrison, within the base environment, within their job, and how do we teach them how to communicate and understand the different cultures before they get overseas? And there were plenty of parameters. There was a lot of research behind it. Out of that research, Joe, we came up with 7 competencies: pre-planning, observation and assessment, initial contact, engagement, maintaining self-control, adaptability, and self-engagement. So the Marine Corps said, hey, in fact, I'll give you a great story on this one, Joe. A individual, we went to a meeting. It was all the Marine Corps brass, all the researchers. He showed a photo of a platoon. They were in front of their squad bay, had attention. They put them at ease. Every single one of them pulled out their phones, and we got to see the actual picture where all these young Marines had their phone in their hand. And the individual, I think he was a lieutenant colonel, I believe, I'm pretty sure, said, we need to make sure that our Marines know how to communicate better. This right here, he held up his phone, is not the means of communicating. In fact, when they go overseas, they can't use this when they communicate behind the wire, right? We have to teach them how to do this better. So on that note, the project began and kicked off. A lot of software innovation came out of it. Classroom delivery came out of it. In fact, I'm working with 2 of the co-founders of that program. You probably know them, Dr. Brian Landy and Dr. Jonathan Winder, on another project with AI, the camera, how to evaluate training using body-worn camera AI. So that's one of the main reasons why this tactical social interaction course was developed, is to teach those who work in our career field how to communicate and gain that trust within the first 30 seconds of contact. How do we do that?
You were doing something similar to this with the Sheriff's Department early on, even before 2014, if I remember correctly, where you were challenging young folks or new recruits, new hires. If I remember this correctly, maybe the two are connected, to to just go have conversations and the challenges associated with that. Is that correct?
That was right after that. I got hired right after I was done with that. I believe that's where it was at. But yeah, our new deputies get this in a 12-hour course. So instead of the 40-hour trainer course, we give it to them in a 12-hour course. That's including going down to the public, utilizing those skills, both in uniform and out of uniform, to give them the perspective of those contacts and the way they view you in uniform and how you have to adapt to that conversation, and how they view you out of uniform and how you have to adapt to conversation. More importantly, especially for those who just don't want to talk to you, how do you gain that trust to have a conversation with them?
Yeah. Okay. So, and I believe I saw a video of you at one point sending folks out into a mall setting and just saying, go have a conversation with the man in the green jacket. And that in itself can be an incredibly awkward experience for somebody who there's an age disparity or social disparities of any kind, that identity distance, right? So there's a major cultural implication to this, as you've already, covered, well in the beginning of this conversation. And so you've taken this 3-week program, brought it down into a 40-hour program, and then somehow synthesized it even further into a 12-hour program. And so if you can, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I was going to say, kind of touch on with me, if you will, a little bit, now let's get into the problem-based learning component of this and how you adapt as a trainer to be able to do that effectively.
Do you want to know about how we adapt or train trainers to do it, or how do we actually pull them through a problem-based learning process, just one of millions of ways through a classroom portion?
I think from the ILEETA perspective, and kind of speak to our instructors out there who, have been raised in that environment where all of our instructor development courses tell us, no more than 4 bullets per slide, no more than so many words per bullet environment. And oh, by the way, if you put pictures in, make sure your clip art fits just this way. Let's talk the trainer piece first. Yes. And then maybe if we have time, we'll pull the thread a little bit more on how it actually.
This is a good conversation, Joe, because, I was one of those instructors. I had the ego. In fact, I still struggle teaching or facilitating problem-based learning. Big time. In fact, our whole team does. So what do we do with instructors? The first thing we do is invite them to the course to experience what the student experiences through the process on that side of the curtain, because we take them through, many different dynamics. Secondly, we make sure they understand how to facilitate conversation and how to facilitate Socratic questioning without taking over that conversation, just in a small group with a team of anywhere from 4 to 6 students. How do you engage that team using Socratic questioning, using that communication style with listening and paraphrasing, that type of a style? Third, we make sure that if we ever start seeing an instructor bring their ego out on the table, we're able to take them to the side and go, we get it, man. But that ego's got to go away. This is not about you. You have tons of skills, knowledge, and ability to bring to the table, but allow them to meet the answer based on their answers to your questions. Allow them to come to that answer. Don't interrupt their thought process. Do your best to allow them to move through their thought process. More importantly, how do we follow up with a question versus saying, yeah, that's the correct answer? How do we follow up to say, guess what? I'm hearing the answer, that's correct, but to validate you really know how to articulate that, let's follow up with another question. And then tell them, yes, you're right on track. What else can we do in this situation, and walk away? I can tell you, since the time we developed this program, look, the content of the program is nothing new. Neither is the style of delivery, but it's the risk of the delivery. So we have to make sure we get that instructor out of that uncomfortable zone to take that risk, to allow the students to struggle in learning. And again, Joe, I'm speaking to the choir here. When we see individuals struggle in learning, what do we do as instructors? We want to try to come in and save them. The hardest part is watching that new instructor try to dab in to get them out of that hard spot and actually move them away and say, no, what question would you ask them to get them to the next step? Let them get to the answer. The students realize by the end of the day, and also by the end of the week, They did all the work to learn. And here's some of the stuff that they tell us. Why did the instructors in here teach us? Well, we did. We asked you very clear questions. In fact, by the second to the last day, you were asking us very clear questions, and we modeled that process with you. So that's the biggest piece, is making sure that the instructors realize when you see a messy environment and you know you got very clear left and right parameters in place, allow that messiness to happen for them to learn. But make sure you're there to where they're not getting outside of that left and right parameter. Always bring them in with the Socratic questioning.
Tony, I love that. And you covered really well what changes for the learner, right? And I've seen it firsthand. When you do this ask, seek, explore methodology, that's
yes.
It is a very uncomfortable environment for the learner. And I've had learners come to me and say, very similar to what you just said, I'm not used to this. I'm uncomfortable with it. In fact, you know where I really notice it is in my evaluations. If you've got thin skin and you think you're going to teach this way, you may be a little bit surprised at what you hear on those evaluations sometimes, because people will call up, well, I felt like, it was uncomfortable and they didn't give the answers, that sort of thing. You talked really well about what changes for the instructor. In fact, you even said sometimes you have to hold that instructor back from giving the answer, getting to the explore and reveal part of this, to really getting after the seek. So now, if you can, talk me through the actual development of the training that enables the instructor to do that. Because it sounds to me, and if I understand this correctly from the way I've tried it in the past, there's a little bit of a shift in how we design the learning environment so that the answer already exists, but it's not revealed until the learner seeks it. Am I hearing that correctly? And what does that do for the instructors and the learning developers?
That's, what I'm hearing you say is talk a little bit about how very critical areas were developed within the content to get to that end state, correct? What means were used? That's a really good question. You're hitting on some very, very emotional topics when I say that. Very good. I love talking about this. And one thing that we first did is we did a lot of research around the area of emotions. What emotions attract learning, right? And more importantly, we use the story with the instructors. When I say this to the students who are going to become instructors, is, do you remember your first fight? Do you remember your first ticket that you wrote? Do you remember these things? And why do you remember these? When we talk about the chemical dump, the hormone dump, the 35, 38 chemicals that go through the body during this period. And before you know it, you remember the smell. You remember everything about that incident. How do we pull that into training? Well, here's what we did. There are very key areas within the training. First of all, we use the ADDIE approach, right? All instructors know the ADDIE. It's a very simple approach if you understand it to get you to your end goal. So we used the ADDIE approach. We went right up front, analyzed whatever we could about the different approaches of learning and how students learn best. Secondly, we wrote our competencies around that based off of the research. We put all the performance objectives in. However, here's the trick. We had this whole tool bag over here of activities. Everybody knows different activities, within the class. But we thought, no, wait a minute. Those are traditional activities. What about we put them through these micro scenarios and let them go through an easy scenario, build that up to a point where they're looking at a very large, complex scenario. At the same time, we're watching the, what's that called? The Tuckman's model. Every time they get a new task in that Tuckman's model, they go from this storming to, this norming bit, and they rock in this area. We know as instructors, when they get in that area, the Socratic question is going to get longer and stronger. We got to get them out of that to help them actually model through that process. So we took this traditional bag and went, no, we don't want to use that. We want to put in place that bring their emotion up every day, 3 to 4 times a day. More importantly, we put in, before they come into class, before the class starts, we ask them, how do you feel? One word, how do you feel? That actually, for instructors, gives us a very good opportunity when we talk about emotional intelligence. How are they feeling in the morning versus how do they feel in the afternoon before they leave? Are we scratching the surface of emotions? Yes, we are. Secondly, are we taking them through the Tuckman's model effectively? Third, I had to train all my instructors to the best of my ability. If you want to think about the situational leadership model, I just wrote on that recently. I had to take them through the process of learning this model of here's how you actually go to that learner. Think about the development level. They're either in a development 1 to development 4. So development 1 is that beginner. Development 2 is that dangerous beginner. Development 3 is where you have to give them a little kick off the mountain. Development level 4 is they're mastering it. So how do we respond to their learning levels, development levels within a class? That's how we had to train the instructors. Lastly, how do we evaluate this monster, right? Here's one for you. We do a pre-assessment using the same rubric that we use throughout the whole class. So we do a pre-assessment. We send them through a scenario just to see if they go through the 7 competencies and where are their gaps at. We tell them what their gaps are at. They're just sitting there going, what does this mean? And at the end, we do the same thing. We show them where they close the gap. But more importantly, every day they're being evaluated using that rubric, getting feedback, closing that gap of learning in. However, Joe, they don't realize that they're closing that gap until they get that 3rd day. Before we go out into the field with the community, they realize, oh yeah, look at that. I did this as a learner. Well, we just took them in the Tuckman's model, using the SL2 or the hybrid of it, teaching our instructors what development levels that they need to meet at with what instructor facilitation models. And then how do we get them out of that? We see this every day. And last, they have a journal, Joe. They have to journal every day, any time of the day, and we respond to those journals. So by the time we get the evaluations at the end of the class, we know pretty much, if I were the AI, generator, I pretty much can tell you what Joe's going to write in his last evaluation based on his journal entries and our conversations. If there's anything missing, they're going to put it there, but we pretty much know what they're going to say at that time and place. So as an instructor and as a developer, it's complex in the sense that you have to have your left and right parameters, but don't rely on the old bag of tricks. Look at what's research-based out there. You got peer-oriented guided learning, peer-led learning. You have all these tricks of the trade that are being used in the Air Force Academy, Army Academy, military, other great facilitators use these, but how do we use them effectively with cops who sit there and go, I don't trust you, and I'm not going to trust this delivery. How do we get them involved? And this works.
Yeah, I want to pull the thread just a little bit more on the instructor tool bag with you if we can, because we've hit here are a couple different things. I love the peer-led learning. The cyclical learning is another great model to approach that with. When we're developing those learning environments, and put yourself, and you obviously fit into this space well as the senior leader or somebody senior in these environments where you're trying to get your instructors to embrace these things, what would you say are some of the most effective ways of getting out of the old-fashioned, here's the exercises we always do, here's the approach we always use? What are some tools that will definitely work?
I think for an executive leader moving this direction, first question I was ask my cadre is, how do you learn in your car? Right? All the answers aren't in front of you. You have to research the answers. In fact, you're not going to go to the same call every time. It may be a DV, but it's going to be different than the last DV. There are similarities within that call. Traffic stop, there are similarities within the traffic stop, but how do we learn on the road? Well, we look for it on our own time, on our own space. We ask good questions from our great supervisors. That's how we learn. We don't know everything throughout our career, but we sure are learners. We sure do seek the answers. Why? Because our environment is very high liability, right? We don't want to be that one officer. We don't want to be that one deputy. I don't want to be the training director who is providing training that is not going to be effective to my deputies. I want them to be in training that is innovative, to where it gives them a little bit more skill when they get out on the street. They know some sort of a problem-solving model in order to resolve their own problems going through this ambiguous, this ill-structured problem every time they take a call. They only have so much information. We have to fill in the gaps. How do we do that? Well, we ask our own selves those critical questions. Why not put it in a classroom? This is what you do every day.
Absolutely. And if it's not your own self, it's your peers or others that, I love the 3 before me thing. There's so many different ways we can embrace the learning environment that, instructors who don't allow cell phone use in the classroom I struggle with that at this point. We know the difference between somebody Googling, I just heard him say this, and I'm not there yet, versus I'm scrolling through social media. And if you've got somebody in your classroom scrolling through social media, it's probably not their problem. I'm just letting you know. So I think this is a great place to kind of now jump into that space of the instructor discomfort with all of this. Why are they uncomfortable? When we're facilitating, there's this moment where we want to jump in and give the answer. There's that awkward pause. Talk to me about the silence. Talk to me about the space that exists there and what is happening in the learner when the instructor doesn't speak.
That awkward pause, that moment of truth, right? Do I stand on the pedestal and hold up the golden ticket or not? The reality is all of us go through it to this day. How do we take that pause with respect, with dignity, with professionalism to allow that individual in front of us to tell us about what they know, not what I know? So I'm only using the word ego right now, Joe's, because that's what I went through, and I still go through it. I think I know everything, and I've been called on the carpet multiple times to test that. And that pause, if you will, is something that all good instructors know how important it is. And I'm not saying there's bad instructors or there's good instructors or there's excellent instructors. We all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses. It's all up what the audience say at that point, right? And we should be growing based on what the audience says. So with my instructors and with those that I've worked with in the past, when we talk about that pause and when we talk about that self-reflection, we also talk about our own emotional intelligence. And that's the same thing we show the students is if you don't know your own emotional intelligence, you won't be able to reflect on the emotional intelligence of that community member that's in front of you. So as an instructor, how do I reflect on my own emotional intelligence and realize this person in front of me is probably a rocket scientist, but I'm not allowing them to put their strengths out in front of me. I'm allowing them to listen to me and only me. However, what that said is you always get that individual in the class who's the rocket scientist say, wait a minute, you're not giving me the answers. Let's have a conversation about what an answer means to you. So what does that pause really mean to the instructors? And I challenge anyone who's listening to this, write down what they feel when they know they have to go through a pause to allow that student to provide that answer to them. How do they stand? What's their heart rate sound like, feel like? What's their mind going through at the moment? Do I really have to say anything? Because here's what usually happens 99% of the time, Joe. We all know this. People who ask good questions or any question know the answer. They just want to know, is their answer accurate based on what the expert in the room is going to tell them? Or better yet, you acknowledge that adult learner in front of you going, that's one hell of an answer. I like that. I want to use that next time because you gave the pause to allow them to bring that learning out. And guess what's going to stay longer? When I pull that discovery out of that student, they're going to learn, they're going to retain that information longer than what I will give to them.
Absolutely. Yeah, let silence do the heavy lifting. I think there are those times where we as instructors, whether it's ego, which I struggle with too, because I feel like I've always had to know the answer if I'm going to be there teaching. And there are times where you know the answer, but a better one exists in the room or a different version of it. And the power of that conversation that happens around that. I mean, when one teaches, two learn, right? And so there's so much in that. There's a risk, though, in that pause that the answer doesn't exist. They just simply don't know. And so what would you say, then how do you teach to handle that when I ask and I'm seeking and the information hasn't connected yet? And maybe it's something I did wrong early on and the way I phrased some things, which, I mean, I make mistakes every time I try this out there and everybody will look at me like, I don't understand the question or however that works. What do you recommend? I mean, I'm thinking like low risk questioning leading to higher risk questioning first. But go ahead. Yeah, you've got more answers.
Just to verify what you're asking is what happens if we're waiting for that answer to come back? We're giving that pause and waiting for that answer to come back, but it's not happening. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, more or less. Yep.
I forgot who that general was. It's usually not your receiver. It's usually the sender, right? So some of the tricks that I use is I use one of the other instructors, and we deliver the class with 4 other instructors plus a lead facilitator. I always go out to the instructor and say, am I missing something? Is there a different way I can answer or ask the question for better, understanding from the learner? And the learners will see that as going, wait a minute, I thought you knew all the answers. Well, right off the bat, I'll tell them, I don't know what's happening here, or better yet, I may not be getting through. So let me see if somebody else will be able to ask the question better than me, coming from either your SME standpoint or from your culture of your organization. It could be a peer who can, move through that process. But if there's a reason why they're not answering it, I usually reach out to my instructors first and go, I may not be asking this correctly. Can somebody help me? Or is there somebody in the room, their peer level, can you help me out with this?
Yeah.
Let's get this conversation started, because I may not be getting through to them, because I always look at it. It's usually not the transmitter. It's usually not the receiver. It's the transmitter. It's usually the issue. So how do I go about using all the talent in the room except for me? Because I don't want to be standing on the pedestal. I want everybody else involved to get to that point. And that took a lot of drop of ego as well, Joe.
And leaning into some vulnerability. I think, one of the things that I love doing, because I occasionally ask a question. In fact, I've probably even done it in this interview with you, where I'll ask the question and maybe you didn't quite understand it. And I love how you're role modeling the exact methods you would use in the environment, where if I'm hearing you correctly, and there's a lot of finesse to that I'm sure you teach in your class, but when that happens and I see that it just didn't land, but there's a nonverbal expression from somebody, like a curiosity look, man, I will lean so hard into that. And I love this one. What did you hear me say? And because oftentimes I teach alone, and so I don't have that other instructor there. So for solo instructors, that's one I use. That find somebody who appears curious, or the other one is your person who often is the spring butt, or the hand that goes up first every time. Ask them, what did you hear me say? And they'll rephrase the question and kind of throw it back out there, and you'll know how it landed with the group. That being said, this kind of leads me to the next question I had for you is, have you ever lost control using this methodology of your learning environment? And by that, I mean, they start going so far off tangent that you've got to work to bring them back in.
That's a well-asked question, Joe. Early on, piloting this process, because I was just getting my feet underneath me of problem-based learning, I went through, there's a 2-week course that was taught up in Canada, came back on problem-based learning specifically. And they said these kind of things are going to happen, right? Where they're going to be so far out there. How do you pull them back in problem-based learning, especially? Yes, I have had that happen. Yes, I've had to pull them back in. And if I remember right, it was in California. We were down there teaching for a post process. And it was clear to me, they were out there and they were gone. And I just told them, here's where you're at. Here's where I think you're at. Here's where you're at. Where should we be as a class? And they realized together, he's lost, we're lost. What are we supposed to do? And they pick up the information that's in front of them, and they realize we better reread the directions first, go back to the instructor, me, and say, here's where we're at, but here's the directions you gave, and here's what happened. So I give it back over to the class, because in problem-based learning, you have to have things so well written. It doesn't look like that to the students, but it's so well choreographed in every single punch of the process, if you will, that if I get off track, I'll ask the students in front of me, because they're either seasoned instructors themselves, they're adults like me, they're seeing one side, I'm seeing the other side, what's going on and how do we come back? Admit, I don't know what just happened here. I think this is happening. I think this is happening. What do you guys see? Okay, how do we pull it back together? So early on, it was a struggle, Joe. It was huge. Today, the left and right parameter are so well established within the course that if anybody starts pinging on one of those parameters, one of the peer team lead instructors that I bring with, they'll start bringing them, pulling them back slightly and get them more centered focus. But we make sure that those are up there so they can hit them a few times and come back. Because not only are we teaching the process, not only are we teaching the class itself, but we're teaching them how to work within a problem-based environment. How do we do that effectively using the adult learning process or guidelines, because we want them to do the same exact process when they go back. But I know from experience, it takes some time and learning to do just that in an environment where you're not lecturing and you're actually trusting in an adult to follow the directions to get to the point Z, right? And they will. You just got to give them that time and that trust.
And don't be afraid to get messy, if I'm hearing you correctly, because like you said, this is a muddy place to be in this type of learning environment using this instructional style. And you can't do that without getting a little bit dirty once in a while. And I think there's another thing I pulled out of what you just said there, which is it's okay to be a little bit vulnerable once you've role modeled this. Obviously, you don't want to start the learning with such a heavy loaded question that you're going to lose control from the very beginning. You've given them the instructions. They know the roadmap of where you're ultimately trying to go. And the best thing to do when you're lost on any journey is to pull that map back out again and ask, where are we right now? And how do we get back on the path where we were? And so if I heard you correctly, that's kind of what you're offering us here is know where you're going, know where you started. And if you leave the route, at least know how to get back there. Even if you've got to admit, I'm lost for a second as a team, let's get back to someplace we know.
Coming from a seasoned practitioner, Joe, well said. Yes. In this field of using problem-based learning, you have to be humble to your own ego, right? Sometimes it gets in the way. And I've had many peers, in fact, a team that I take around and teach with me here or other places, we have very clear conversations probably every 15 to 20 minutes of the process. I kid you not. And it could be a 30-second quick conversation to realize I'm working from an ego standpoint and I need to stop that. Or we're having problems with this dynamic in this team. How do we work together as a team to get there, right? Yes, it's got to be a very clear communicative process to do that.
Talk to me more about problem-based learning and how it improves judgment and how spending time in ambiguity and training improves our operational abilities in the real world, regardless of what the problem is.
Yeah, problem-based learning is one of those areas of learning I would consider, just for me, I'm not the expert in it whatsoever. There's many more who understand this much better than I do. But problem-based learning is that environment which we try to get people outside of their comfort zone. We do. And the reason why we do that is because when our adrenaline is up a certain notch, right, there's a balance with our adrenaline. There's a balance within that environment that if we get into that point, we'll learn longer. We take that information, we're able to retain it longer. The same example I used at the beginning of this conversation was, look, when we have a critical incident that happens to us, when we have something that happens to us in class, our adrenaline comes up, 35 to 38 chemicals dump, correct? Problem-based learning does that if you have it written correctly the entire time throughout, but in different peaks and flows, ebb and flows. If it's written in that way with the peaks, ebbs, and flows, if you will, you're able to bring that learning up at the highest point, bring it back down, allow them to journal, to reflect on it, bring the learning back up to the highest point. So that's problem-based learning and how we manage that. We do it every day at work. We just don't realize that we facilitate our own learning through those ebbs and flows, through calls, critical calls, talking with the community where you remember certain things. So how do we manage that, right? The biggest one is in adult learning, problem-based learning. Joe, I probably lost track of your question. Interesting one. The biggest one in problem-based learning is don't lose track of the desired outcome of the student, not of the lesson, right? It's not about the lesson. It's about the learning of the student. And sometimes you got to go off track in order to bring that student from what they know, from their values, from their everything that they have in their toolbox of learning, to bring them back in because they're experiencing this out there. And now you got to bring them back in through that problem-based learning process. Hopefully that kind of.
Oh, it absolutely did. I think that's part of the fun of this conversation with me. And I'm really hoping that the audience is getting as much out of it as I think they will. And as I certainly am, because there is no simple cookie cutter answer to this. I mean, you teach this course for a very specific reason. In fact, if I understand correctly, I mean, communication is the social interaction is largely communication, and you don't look at communication as a soft skill in a traditional sense. It's a tactical capability. It's an operational capability. Kind of talk to me about that and what that, why there's a difference there.
Well, let's talk about this conversation we're having now, Joe. Just through a camera, I can take on your micro expressions. I can take on your body language, kinesics. I can take on your proxemics and how you're coming back and forth through the camera. I see where you're looking. So what I try to do is say, okay, at least in our conversation, what's next? What's happening with this conversation? How do I feel based off? And when I say feel, literally, because your feelings take in a lot. Then you got to go through your logical brain, your hidden brain, your logical brain, right? That logical brain's going, here's what Joe's thinking. Here's what Joe's acknowledging what I'm doing, right? We take them through that process of learning. So it's huge when we do that. It's your proxemics, kinesics, biometrics, especially biometrics. Everybody thinks biometrics is, the eye dilation going through some sort of camera, which it is, right? But we teach that in the class, so that way when they have that social interaction with others, either internal of the organization or external with the community, that they're able to read the 3 Qs. We call them, what book is that? I'll send you the book's name so that way.
I'll add to the show notes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Anyway, once we realize that there's these cues that we actually bank off of, that we start hitting on these cues going, something, Joe, I found that when you asked that question, you found it important based off your body language and your eye, movement and the way your face was tightening up and your micro expressions. Let's talk about this a little bit more. That's very passionate to you, right? So now I took your body language, and this is through the class itself. I took your body language. I said, this is important to you. It's important to me now. Let's talk about what you were just providing to me as a way to gain more knowledge from you, right? So it's critical that this process of learning takes into account multiple different venues, and that is, especially problem-based learning, is that you take in not only the environment, but you're also taking in the body language, the tone, voice modulation, because you're trying to figure out where in the heck is this student at? Where are they going with this? That's the same thing with the contact. Where's this contact going with this information? Are they telling me the truth or not, right? What's that sound like? Well, the body language gives away cues. You go off of those cues. Let's see if those cues are accurate, because a lot of times we know that in kinesics, certain body language is cultural. It's not something that we learn across, this is common, but micro expressions, we also realize that it's pretty much in every culture. A smile is a smile, anger is anger. You and I, when we're talking to each other, I can see your brows go up when you're interested in something, and the question you're going to ask next time, to be cued in on that, is learning within itself to gain that trust within the 30 seconds of not only the course, but also when they go back out, teach it and go work with the community immediately. Right. And I'll leave you with this on this one is, we've had individuals come back to us on a Tuesday or Wednesday. Let me tell you the story back in the Marine Corps. When we were teaching the Marine Corps this skill, we had family members, wives, come into us on a Wednesday and say, what are you guys teaching our husbands? And luckily I had their chain of command in a room that will help out answer this. They're actually turning their body into us and actually talk. They're actually putting, we challenged them to do this at home. They didn't grab the beer before they came home. They just sat down and say, hey, let's talk about your day. Right? These are things, but they were wondering what the heck we were doing in order to change the mindset. They were fun people. They just wanted to come in and observe what the heck was going on, because we were changing the mindset of that Marine in the personal environment. What are we going to do with them when they go overseas? Well, some of the data that was coming back overseas, from my understanding, was very positive. And that is, they were gaining that trust behind the wire with blue on green, meaning they were working with the Iraqis, with our forces, and they were behind the wire with them. And they had to gain that trust with them. How did they do that? Well, they made that conversation priority based on that culture. How do we do that? So problem-based learning is not a secret. It's not a magical tool. It's something that it's risky. Jump into it, make it happen. We don't have problem-based learning in everything we do here at this organization, at the sheriff's office. In fact, we have firearms. How dare I give somebody a firearm over there and go discover that,
Yeah,
No.
I was going to ask that. So we don't have it in every learning environment. I know you use it for TSI, which
Yep.
I cannot wait to close out with a quick overview of TSI and what you're doing there, because that's the course you have coming up, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I want to hear more about that. But like you said, it doesn't work in every environment. But what are some of the environments besides social interaction where problem-based learning might be an effective instructional methodology?
If I was going to teach crim law and crim pro, I'd start out with problem-based learning, because especially to seasoned officers, you don't lecture to seasoned officers unless you absolutely have to. They know the answers. They just need to be brought into a situation, give them a few ill-structured problems, let them walk through it, right? That's one area. We can talk about multiple different cognitive type of classes that problem-based learning would work well. But when it comes to psychomotor skill, let's be real. I'm not out there preaching that we should go out and give them the access to the gym and let them learn on their own. Injuries, high risk, liability, firearms, sticks. No, it's a very strict process in order to teach those skills or refresh those skills with others. I might say, hey, Sergeant, you've been through this training many times in your career. Why don't you come up here and just show to us what you've obtained and how you would teach this skill, right? That would bring the attention of the whole group up going, oh, I don't want to be in that position, so I'm going to pay attention to what's going on. But I wouldn't let them self-discover in those type of situations. Instead of lecture, if it's a 4-hour situation, I might lecture because I have to get the information out there. I'm not saying lecture will go away. Lecture is very critical in order to disseminate information. But if I have a class that I really want this information to be retained and used immediately and taught to other individuals, I would use problem-based learning to do that, right? Maybe an 8-hour class or a 40-hour class, that's what I would do, especially if those individuals are seasoned individuals. Now, problem-based learning will work in the academy, but you would set them up with, let's do, and I'm only using this as a hypothetical, let's do 20 hours of lecture, but then let's do 30 hours of problem-based, and then let's put them in their scenarios to reinforce what they just learned, right? We don't want to give them the problem. We really could if you set it up well and you had very well-trained instructors, but that takes time, that takes money. So yeah,
there's a lot of experimentation that happens there. I'm all about the concrete experience, kind of putting people into this very challenging, ambiguous environment and kind of letting them figure it out. There's an argument out there amongst the constraints-led approach advocates that there is a space for whether it's defensive tactics or firearms, say, go figure it out. I think there's a happy balance, and I think there's some misinterpretation happening there.
Yes.
Just calling it like I see it, and I invite the conversation to help me better understand. But as you just said, there is a space where if I can give somebody information and then say, go muddle it and get dirty with it and figure it out and spend some time in the that ambiguity,
Yep.
the learning is richer, right? It requires effortful retrieval and all of those other things and interleavings, space practice, all of that occurs, varied practice. All of that happens in that space that is ambiguous. So to your point, if I heard you correctly, experiment with it. The challenge to anyone who hears this, if there's a way you can get out from behind the podium or step away from your slides and create that space where people have to muddle in ambiguity, give it a try. If it's safe, am I hearing you correctly?
Absolutely, Joe. If we don't experiment, we're not going to expand, right, as instructors. And it took me a lot to experiment with problem-based learning. After that certification, it took a lot to experiment it, to feel successful at it. More importantly, I fell at it all the time. And that's how we grow as adults, hence adult learning. As long as you're willing to accept that failure and learn based off of that failure, that's what problem-based learning is all about. Is we're not going to be perfect with the answer, but I'm going to get an answer based on my space and time, based on my knowledge, based on my maturity, based on what I know, because I've seen it. I've delivered this class multiple times, military, law enforcement, hospitals. I've seen it every single time. You have a set of knowledge in that classroom. Why do I have to give it to you when everybody in a class has, from a PhD, doctorate, from a physician, all the way down to somebody who's answering the phone call within that hospital or that environment? There's all your knowledge right there. Give them an ill-structured problem, and let them resolve it based on what's in the room, right?
Absolutely.
And all
And
your
then the organization changes as a result of that. We could dwell on this all day, but some of the most fun I've had is going into organizations and watching from senior leaders to junior new hires muddle through a problem together, and the interactive learning that happens in that space kind of challenges some of the status quo of rank and hierarchy in that. But when it's done right and it's facilitated well, safely for the leaders in the room, the culture changes, beliefs adapt. And I mean, there's a lot that goes there. So you've got this course coming up, TSI.
It's a 4-day, 40-hour course. A little bit of research behind why that was as well. We realized that a 5-day course at 8 hours was not getting us to the highest peak of learning, even though people say 10 hours is too long. What we found was the 10-hour days, 4 days, actually got them to their peak of learning. It was quite interesting.
You got a whole other episode there, Tony. I'm so curious about that now, but I'll digress. Stick to this topic. Man, that is.
Yeah, it was, as long as it's well structured. If it's not well structured, 10-hour days is a waste of time, because we know as an adult learner that you have them for a very short period. I've read research that you have them, say, for example, on an hour period, you have them for 28 minutes, 29 minutes. Then you have them for so many minutes for question and answers, then you take a break, right? That's how the adult mind works. Anyway, more on TSI, but yeah, that's a whole different conversation on that one. It's interesting. But yes, our TSI class, June 22nd through the 25th. Our goal is to make sure that we provide the training to those individuals that are coming in that will give them the opportunity to teach the short course interaction. It's called Interactions and Perception back at their agency, or they can take different learning activities out of this course, take them back and teach whatever they want using the activities, right? They can just use the foundation of the activities to teach whatever knowledge they want. But the whole point of this is to get the instructor access, to give them access to problem-based learning, have them experience it, and then they can use pieces of it. We don't expect them to go back and teach problem-based learning from that point forward, but to take the activities and the foundation of the activities, put it in other courses, take the activities as written, and use opportunities at their agencies for micro-learning opportunities. They don't have to teach the full 40 hours, nor do they have to teach the 16-hour course. They can take what they learned out of the course, what they're passionate about, and use that.
Love it. Thank you. That was a really quick thumbnail sketch, but it covered it all really well. So quick speed round for you here. Other than taking this course, give me a couple of tips on if an agency wants to implement problem-based learning, fastest way to start. What do you do?
Do your research on problem-based learning. That's the biggest one. Do a lot of research on it, where it fits best within your ideology of learning, within your environment, within your organization. Secondly, take it small. Take one small activity and do it multiple times so you can get used to the dynamics that's going to come back to you from the individual who's learning, who you're facilitating learning to. Third, make sure everybody understands when you're in a problem-based learning environment that you're not there to teach. You're there to facilitate learning. And they're going to hear a lot of questions. In fact, I use it as my curiosity time, Joe. It's, that's an interesting topic. I don't know anything about it. Let's talk about it. And they're like, what? Really? Yeah, let's talk about what you just said, because it leans right into the topic that we have, but I have no clue what you're talking about. So tell me more about it. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. And afterwards, let's journal about what you just learned within that context of our dialogue. What did you hear? What did you see? How did that increase the learning for everybody in that individual? Make sure they understand that adult learning is not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. Mainly the student, right? It's giving that student access to know what they know, learn what they know, and ask the solid questions to gain more information, because 99% of the time, they know the answers. They just need somebody to say, you're right on target, based on what you articulated.
I love it. And so one more question for you here, and I heard a couple of them in there. I'm an instructor. I want to get started at this. You kind of talk the agency piece, the big picture. What skills would you say I need to develop and I need to be prepared to use effectively to present this learning methodology?
That's an awesome question. First, your own emotional intelligence. Make sure you're centered with who you are and you know what your weaknesses are and you know what sets you off in a learning environment. Really, when your heart rate goes and your adrenaline kicks in, why did it just happen in an environment that you have full control over? That's one. Actually, the learner does, but you're just facilitating it. So emotional intelligence, too, make sure they understand. And this was, because, my graduate degree helped me out a lot, but it didn't give me a lot, if that makes sense. It was the experience, right? So you got the emotional intelligence. Second, cultural intelligence. Make sure you know who your individuals are in the classroom. Not everybody thinks the same way. Yes, they're adults. More importantly, make sure that you understand that some cultures may not accept this training freely. And when I say that is we have different cultures within our own organizations. Make sure we understand that. Also, I don't have the data in front of me, but I found that introverts are much more effective in this type of environment than introverts. But introverts usually help the extroverts with answers because they're internalizing it. So make sure you understand your multiple intelligence. What I mean by that is make sure that all learners have this way of learning effectively. May it be through science, may it be through math, may it be through emotions, may it be through those multiple intelligence lists. How do they learn? I'm not asking the instructor or your audience that you have to, I don't want to use the word pander, that you have to try to hit all these things, but make sure you understand that there are different learners in that environment and that they have multiple intelligence in order to gain a lot of their strengths too, right? Just understand that, because when you're delivering problem-based learning, you're delivering to every cultural intelligence, multiple intelligence, you're delivering to everybody in that environment. And they'll accept that in that way. Once you realize that as an instructor, your delivery is going to be much easier because they're actually going to guide you. And that's the last one. Allow the student to guide you through the process, and you don't guide the student through the process. And what I mean by that is the student's going to teach you more than you ever came in that classroom with. All you have to do is stop, listen, and ask the right Socratic questions in order to gain that knowledge out of that student.
I love it. Hey, Tony, thank you so much for spending this time with me today and kind of jumping in the deep end with me right off the bat. And really, and we did. And there was so much good to be gleaned out of this. I cannot wait for our next conversation or to read your next article on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is probably the best way to get a hold of you, if I understand correctly. And that's how I typically do.
Yeah.
Okay.
That'll work. Yep, absolutely.
I'll share that information. And then if somebody wants to learn more about this course you have coming up, where should they go?
You can go to the Spokane County Sheriff's Office training site on the website, or you can contact me directly at Anderman, that's AANDERMAN at SpokaneSheriff.gov.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, for being on the Learning Lab with us. And again, stay safe out there. I can't wait to see you in the future.
Thank you, and I'm honored. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
This is exactly the sort of conversation we want to have here on the ILEETA Learning Lab, where we develop these in-depth conversations, a meaningful struggle. There were no easy answers in that conversation I had with Tony, and I hope that came through to you as the listener in this moment, where there's an opportunity for us to really embrace the struggle in this space. That's what the Learning Lab is all about. It's not designed to be some simple interview where I provide them with a list of questions and they've got all the time in the world to answer them. I want this sort of conversation where we lean into the ambiguity. And hopefully today we were able to role model a little bit of those best practices of problem-based learning in those spaces where learning is a challenge and it's designed to be that way specifically by us as trainers. I want to encourage each and every one of us in this space that as we design learning, ask ourselves, how can we do better to create an environment where the learner is central to everything that we do. And we create an environment where struggle is not some source of chaos or lack of safety, but rather intentionally designed, where ambiguity is a tool that we can leverage to help the learner better retain the information and transfer that knowledge and connect it to other deeply held beliefs, to get them to challenge assumptions, to challenge those status quo of organizational cultures where they expect rote memorization from their trainers and the stomping of the feet to get them to pass a test. Those days need to come to an end. We are being challenged in ways as trainers that we've never been challenged before. And I think Tony and I had a really good opportunity today to scratch the surface of that really well. In 1 hour, we were able to cover quite a bit of information. If the Learning Lab is something that appeals to you and you think other trainers can use it, please continue to share this information. If you've got a guest or you yourself would like to be a guest on the Learning Lab, don't hesitate to reach out to me. My information is all over the ILEETA website, on social media, but you can reach out to me at jwillis@ileeta.org if you'd like to either recommend a guest or be a guest yourself. If you're interested in being a corporate sponsor and sponsoring one of these episodes, we also welcome that as well. So thank you so much to Tony and you as the listener out there, the ILEETA Learning Lab listenership, our members. We certainly appreciate you, and to all of our corporate sponsors who make this possible. Thank you so much.